Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you. My name is Dr. Darren Slade. I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research. And I want to say thank you for attending today, the 2020 International eConference on Religion and the Holocaust. You are attending this conference with people from all over the world, from every continent. And so what's great about this event is that you didn't have to hop on an airplane, or most likely you didn't have to buy a hotel room to attend this conference. You get to do it from the comfort of your own home. And that's what's incredible about our organization and about these academic conferences. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing one of my personal friends and one of the world's foremost authorities and scholars in Jewish studies. And I would like to introduce him by sharing a presentation quickly. So Dr. Charles Isbell, he today is going to be speaking on medieval treatment of the Jew and the Church. Now, Dr. Isbell has a PhD in Hebrew and Judaic studies. He is a specialist in ancient Near Eastern and biblical languages, literatures, and linguistics. This guy knows just about every ancient language. So if you have a question for him about that, he's an excellent resource. He loves talking ancient languages and literatures. He's also an original member of the translation committee of the New American Standard Bible, or what we call the NASB. He is currently a professor at Louisiana State University, where he teaches Old Testament, world religions, Holocaust studies, Hebrew prophets, religion, politics, and the Hebrew language. I'd like to highlight two of his more recent publications. The first one is called How Jews and Christians Interpret Their Sacred Texts, a Study in Transvaluation. What Dr. Isbell does in this book is he gives a comparative textual study of the Hebrew scriptures along with the Jewish Talmud and the Christian New Testament, as he traces the historical trajectories of both Judaism and Christianity and their interpretive practices. Now, his discussion on transvaluation, which is kind of his term for how exegetes have retained the core values of authoritative sacred texts in order to make those texts relevant for faith and practice. His study goes into a lot of the historical, theological, and sociological and political developments of how both Jews and Christians have interpreted their texts. The second book is called Sermons from a Southern Rabbi, and I love this because it is a lot more personable, where you actually get to read 35 sermons that Rabbi Charles has preached to his own Jewish congregations over the years, discussing the things related to Jewish high holidays. But what's incredible is that he takes an exegetical approach, or he takes sacred text and he applies it to your life today. So with that, I want to say thank you, Dr. Isbell, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you for that introduction. You read it exactly as I wrote it, and I do appreciate that. We're beginning to look at the medieval European treatment of Jews, and we start with the first idea of proselytism and ghettos. Now, we need to understand that as following the clash over whether Rome was going to follow A or B, when it became the Holy Roman Empire, this began, I think, when Bishop Ambrose forced the Emperor Theodosius to back down, and if by refusing to do what the bishop wanted, he was until he complied. And so this sort of sets the stage for the fact that from here on, the church is going to be in charge of the empire. Now, the rules of the church then become civil law. So the canon law of the Catholic Church becomes civil law throughout the Roman Empire. And this is codified when the Theodosian Code it actually makes legal the sanction of civil inferiority of the Jews. They are defined in this code by Theodosius II as enemies of the Romans' law and of the Supreme Majesty himself, the Emperor. Now, in 1270, Thomas Aquinas reprises an idea that had begun with St. Augustine a little earlier. Augustine had said, in consequence of their sins, the Jews were destined to perpetual slavery. And so Thomas Aquinas adds to that, state sovereigns may treat their Jews, the goods of their Jews, as their own property, with the sole provision that they do not deprive them of all that is necessary to sustain life. So, along with that, these things happen. Jews are subjected to special taxes. Their right to worship is restricted. And we can follow this with a series of papal bulls. Bullum, of course, is the Latin word for a seal, but it is an official statement by a Roman or a Catholic pope. And, there are all sorts of these that talk about usury and compelling Jews to wear special clothes and burning various kinds of literature, ordering that priests be trained to preach Christianity to the Jews. And then this one here is just a generic mass of things. Here, in 1482, the kings are empowered to appoint inquisitors to discover and prevent Jewish practices. And then this 1555 bull establishes the ghetto in Rome, forbidding contact between Jews and Christians. And then 1569 accused Jews of magic, and which I like a lot. I was an A- student in magic myself in school. And then here in 1577, Jews in Rome are commanded to send delegations to the church where they might be forced to listen to particular sermons. And then that is buttressed a few years later, decreeing that each Saturday, which happens to be the Jewish Sabbath, as you know, 100 Jewish men and 50 Jewish women must attend church and they must listen to a sermon on conversion. Now, it's only fair to point out that this was never official policy. King Louis the Pious, Charles the Bald, one of my favorite characters in history, actually stood against this and did not like it. But then along comes a strong emperor, Constantine VII, who in 950 instituted a juramentum Judaeorum, a special oath for Jews. Let me read it really quickly. About the goods for which this man brings suit against you, so help you God who created heaven and earth. If you eat anything, may you become defiled. May the earth swallow you unless you are true to what you have sworn. May the blood and the curse remain on you, which your kin brought upon themselves when they tortured Jesus Christ and said, his blood be upon us and on our children. May this be true, so help you God, and the oath you have taken if you tell a lie. I personally would be a little uncomfortable with an oath of that nature, and it was specifically for the Jew. And it is actually official Roman Empire law. Now, the first instance of forced baptism about which we know, and this will be the first specific action that is taken under the terms of the law. It occurred on the island of Minoria, which is a small island. I think it's close to Minorca. It's off the coast of Spain. And late in the 6th century, Pope Gregory decreed that baptism should not be imposed by force, and has this statement: it is not valid, baptism is not valid unless it is accepted willingly. Now, the response to that was that priests, local priests throughout Europe, began a great debate about the current interpretation of the term willingly. So the question would be posed like this: if a Jew chooses baptism under the threat of death, but no force is actually applied, is that willing or not? And so on May the 14th, I think that would be, let's see, that would be the next one, sorry. On May the 14th, why are we not showing that? There we go. 576, the Bishop of Clermont-Ferrand made the following speech to the Jews of his town after a Christian mob had destroyed the local synagogue. If you are ready to believe as I do, become one flock with us, and I will be your pastor. If you are not ready to do so, depart from this place. About 500 Jews did choose to convert, but the Jews who did not convert were exiled to Marseille. This incident then became certified in 938 as a willing baptism. No force was actually applied. It was just a threat of force. So this incident was considered in 938. The Pope looked at it as a willing conversion. Okay, and that becomes then the way that this has happened. All right, 875, Bishop Agobard assembles the Jewish children of the town of Lyon and baptized all who appeared to him to be agreeable. Okay, now, according to the official statement of the church, the Constitutio Pro Judaeis, Constitution for the Jews, violence could not be used to force a Jew to convert. However, Pope Innocent III in 1201 issued a statement defining conditional willingness, conditionally willing if they were given the proper chance. And then the statement adds that no convert to Christianity can renounce baptism after the fact, no matter what threat had been used. And then as late as 1747, Pope Benedict XIV ruled that a child baptized even illegally is still a Christian. Now there's a new chapter that is opened here in 1543 with the House of Catechumens being established. The practice is quickly copied in other areas, and any person who was perceived to have a slight inclination, that is the term that's used, was imprisoned in the House of Catechumens while his intentions were examined and explored by Christian questioners. Of course, in popular thought, it became believed that anybody who secured the baptism of an unbeliever was assured of paradise. It seems an odd way to win your award. But this sort of thing begins to happen. And finally, in 1762, we see the son of a rabbi in Carpentras, France, forcibly baptized in ditch water as he was returning to the city and to see his children, his parents again. He was only 6 years old at the time. But the most famous of these forced baptism kinds of things and conversion is that of Edgardo Mortara. Secretly, at the age of 1, he was baptized. And then the story is kind of interesting because there's a whole book about it that you can find. At the age of 1, the child became quite ill. Some sort of flu. That if you have children, you know a young child can appear to be horribly ill very, very quickly. And so his Christian nurse became worried that the child would die and not be able to go to heaven as a Christian. So without the knowledge and consent of the parents, she took the 1-year-old baby to the local church, and there in the baptismal font in front, she herself baptized the child. Now, this was a secret baptism when he was only one. It was by a domestic servant who was not a priest and had nothing to do with the church in an official capacity. But the ruling that was made was that he was taken from his parents to the house of catechumens at the age of 6, and he never ever saw his parents again. Now, there was a huge hue and cry about this, but it availed nothing. Moses Montefiore, for those of you who know a little bit about Jewish history, will recognize his name. Alliance Israélite Universelle in 1860 started this national or universal Israelite alliance to defend the civil rights of Jews. They made petitions to the Pope and got nowhere with it. Now, then in 1840, the Russian Empire employed a method of kidnapping Jewish children between the ages of 8 and 12, teaching them to abandon Judaism and then to enlist them for military service in the Russian army. Okay. And of course, there's a lot more detail than to which we could go about all of this. But I want to turn now to these conversion sermons, the second kind of thing, for the forced baptism or forced sermons and that sort of thing. The first recorded instance of sermons that are preached is this letter to baptized Jews. It's a letter to the clergy of Lyon, as we mentioned, to preach Christian sermons in synagogues every Sabbath. And in fact, it became so popular that even the Dominican order was given a command to regularize this system, and it rose all the way to the top. King James I of Aragon actually issued a sermon himself. So here you have a national leader who goes into a church and preaches a sermon of conversion for Jews who are forced to attend. Now, this is official papal approval of compulsory conversion sermons. It comes in 1278. But it's interesting to read some of the descriptions here. Upon entering the church, the ears of each Jew were examined to verify that they were not plugged. And beadles armed with rods stood in the aisles to ensure that the captive audience paid proper attention. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that there are a lot of Jewish congregants in synagogues I have served who would have needed to be awakened to some of my less inspiring sermons. So that's probably not a bad idea if you want to make sure people are listening to what you just give them a whack in the head. The philosopher Michel de Montaigne in 1581 revealed that on a visit to Rome, he had been forced to hear a sermon so violent that he was afraid he wouldn't get home alive, and he appealed directly to the emperor. Okay, next, the Ferdinand II goes to the University of Vienna, I started to say Virginia, and began to institute sermons for conversion in a very large university in the auditorium of the University of Vienna. And it was the Jesuits who copied this practice at the great University of Prague. Of course, the great poet Robert Browning used these words to describe what was happening. The hangman entered our bounds, yelled, pricked us out to his church like hounds. It got to a pitch when the hand indeed which gutted my purse would throttle my creed. And it overflows when even the odd men I helped to their sins help me to their God. All right. Now we go to a third issue of proscription and book burning. As early as 553, I believe it was Emperor Justinian, had made an unsuccessful attempt to prevent the teaching of Judaism, even in synagogues. And then finally, in 1199, Pope Innocent III ruled that the teachings of sacred scripture were too profound for ordinary people to understand, and declared that Christians should rely on the clergy solely for their biblical interpretation. Now, what it was doing also was to rule Jewish literature that the church wanted to control to be out of bounds. The ecclesiastical fear had profound and negative consequences for Jews. Watch what happens. In 1236, a memorandum containing 35 charges against the Talmud were submitted to the Pope. Now, this, as if you know about the Talmud, it is certainly second in importance and sanctity to the Jew, second only to the Hebrew Scriptures themselves. But it was deemed, they were 63 volumes, that's all I would say. They were deemed to be a work of blasphemy, attacking the church, mocking Jesus, and instilling a hostility against all non-Jews. So in response to this memorandum, the Pope ordered that Jewish books throughout France be confiscated, and the confiscation was set for a Sabbath in 1240. Similar orders, by the way, were sent from the Pope to the kings of England, Spain, and Portugal. So at this point, the public is invited to a debate. This is what the Pope orders: a debate between Jews and Christians to be scheduled in Paris on June 25, 26, and 27 of that same year, 1240. The Jewish spokesman was a rabbi named Yehiel. Sorry, I got a little behind there. And Rabbi Yehiel was the most eminent Jewish scholar in France and quite an authority on the Talmud. Now, at that time, the Talmud had never been translated from its original languages of composition, that would be Hebrew and Aramaic. So only a tiny number of non-Jews in the world had any firsthand knowledge of its contents. So Rabbi Yehiel was very easily able to defend this against the Christian accusers. There was a Christian Hebraist named Andreo Masio who was well schooled in Hebrew and knew how to read the Hebrew and Aramaic of the Talmud. And he personally scoffed at the idea of a debate between priests and rabbis on the Talmud, concluding that an opinion about the Talmud from a non-Jew was as valid as the opinion of a blind man about hues and colors. So this debate accomplished nothing. Well, a couple of years later, a committee of Christian inquisitors, again, none of whom could read Hebrew or Aramaic, condemned the Talmud and ordered the burning of 24 wagon loads of books. It's important to remember this is long before Kinko's and long before we can make instantaneous copies in multiple numbers of books. These are handwritten manuscripts that are just priceless. Same thing happens in Barcelona, Toulouse, Tortosa, Basel. And this papal order to burn the Talmud and other Jewish books was not rescinded for 300 years. Well, along the way, rules for the debate were set. Ask yourself how you would like to be on this side. Any citation of the New Testament or an early church father was considered true on its face. The citation of a Jewish scholar was ruled irrelevant and inadmissible by the judge, who was always a Christian presiding over the debate. The rabbis actually never fared very well with any of these. Now, because the Pope himself had declared the Talmud to be a book of blasphemy, Italy became a hub of book burnings. The most well-known one was on Rosh Hashanah in 1553 at Campo de' Fiori in Rome. Thousands of books thrown into a gigantic pyre, and at least 10 other cities besides Campo de' Fiori. Now, this papal prohibition of the Talmud for Christians was officially rescinded in 1564, but the local authorities, the local priests and so forth, continued to burn the Talmud. In fact, the last public burning of the Talmud that we know until the Nazi era in Germany in the 30s was in Poland in 1757. All right. What's number 4? The era that gave the world masterpieces like Michelangelo's David and Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and Botticelli's The Birth of Venus also left us another legacy, and that is the ghetto. This is the establishment of segregated living quarters for Jews. Now, in light of what we have seen earlier, this should not be surprising, because there had been the idea that Jews and Christians shouldn't live together, they shouldn't read the same books, they certainly should not intermarry. And so the idea of a separate place for Jews to live actually, I think, is a natural outgrowth of some of these ideas. Now, the first walled ghetto was in Venice in 1516, and here we have some pictures of that. They're not very easy to read, but you can see that the Jewish ghetto is right in the middle of town, and it is surrounded by the rest of it. There you see where you have a bridge, and if you look at the left and look at the state of repair of the building on the left and compare it with those on the right that are already old and frayed and look like they really need a lot of work, well, the one on the right is the ghetto. Okay,